Have you ever been on a network and you're doing some activity, maybe copying a file or hitting a web page, and you think to yourself, that is really, really slow? Well, most of the time, that's not a good thing, and we can improve performance, especially on slow WAN links, in our corporate infrastructure by using a feature called branch cache. Let's begin. When we think about networks, who really likes or enjoys a slow network? And the answer is somebody who's selling bandwidth or high-speed networks so they can make a sale. However, for the users, for example, at this branch office, if this link here between them and the corporate network, whether it's a private circuit or they're getting connectivity through the internet, if it's a relatively slow connection, when users here like Bob and Lois and Sally, if they're accessing files over here on content servers at the headquarters site, a slow WAN link, wide area network link, can slow down their progress. So there's a couple solutions to this. One is DFS. We've talked about that in previous nuggets, where we could take content and replicate it based on a schedule to a server out here at the branch site. And another option that we have for helping performance over a slow link is referred to as branch cache. And here's the basics of how it works. The first time content is requested from the content server, it does have to trek over that slow link. However, once it makes it across the link, like a pioneer, once that data is here locally, it can be cached, and then the devices here at the branch office can read that information from the cache locally and not have to pull the files all the way across the slow link again. So you might ask, well, who are the players in this game called branch cache? Well, we have content servers. So for example, this server right here could be a content server that has the content, and a content server could have files that it's serving up or web pages that it's serving up, or it could be an application server serving up apps. And then at the branch office site, we have two different options for caching that content locally here at the branch office. One is we could use a Windows 2016 server that's at the branch office that's going to be doing the caching. And if we have a server at that branch office, that's referred to as hosted cache mode, because we have an individual host at that branch office that's caching that for us. And the other question is, well, if we don't have a server at the branch office doing the caching for us, what other possible choices are there? And that's a great question. The other option, besides hosted cache mode, is referred to as distributed cache mode. And in distributed cache mode, we don't have a server at the branch office, but instead all the computers at that branch office that support branch cache, they can reserve a little bit of their hard disk space as a group and cache that. So for example, if Bob has downloaded a file and initially has it cached on his computer, the other devices on that same subnet in this branch office, if they're enabled for branch cache in distributed cache mode, they're going to be doing queries seeing if any of the other devices on that subnet have that file or that content already cached. And if so, for example, Lois here can go ahead and simply retrieve it locally off of another computer on the branch who had previously cached that content. And those are the two modes for the caching: hosted with a Windows 2016 server, or distributed, where we have the actual computers themselves do the caching on behalf of other devices in that same subnet at the branch. So to make this work, we're going to install a role for branch cache here on the corporate server that's serving up files. And at the branch office, we'll enable a branch cache feature on this host cache server to make it possible. Also, we need to tell everybody about the rules. For example, we need to tell the computers, hey, we're using branch cache. And the most typical way in a large environment to push out that policy, saying we're using branch cache, is to do it through group policy objects. We'd also want to go to this host cache server and tell it to register as a host cache server so it can start doing the caching on behalf of the branch office. So in the hands-on lab, if you haven't launched it already, take a moment and go ahead and launch it so you can practice alongside. And what we're going to do here on DC Nug is we'll go ahead and open up Server Manager. And here in Server Manager, we're going to go ahead and add a role, specifically for branch cache. So to do that, we can click on Add Roles and Features. We'll maximize that. Click on Next, click on Next, click on Next again. And then here, tucked under File and Storage Services, and if we further expand File and iSCSI Services, here we're going to put a check in the checkbox for branch cache for network files. Now, if we're not doing file services, for example, if we're doing web services or app services, we don't need to actually install this role, but instead, we could install just the feature on the next page. So if we're serving up files like file services, we want this role on the content server enabled. And then we'll click on Next. And if we were also acting, for example, as a web server that we wanted to have cached, or an app server, we could also then go ahead and use this option right here of branch cache as a feature. So that's how you enable it for files, apps, and web content. So for this demonstration, I'm going to go ahead and just do file services from DCNug, who's going to be our content server. So instead of enabling this feature of branch cache, I installed the role on the previous page, and we'll go ahead and click on Next to continue. And then we'll click on Install, and we'll go ahead and let that finish. And while that finishes, let's go over to Server 2. So here on Server 2, we'll go into Server Manager. We'll click on Add Roles and Features. We'll maximize that and click on Next a few times. And what we're going to do here is we are not going to select the role for the branch cache for network files, but on the caching server, the branch office, what we're going to do is simply click on Next, and we're going to go for the branch cache feature here on the Features pane. And with that selected, we'll go ahead and click on Next. And then we'll click on Install, and we'll let that finish as well. Click on Close. And while that finishes, let's go back to DC-Nug, and let's actually create a share and put some content. So we have some content to share out from the content server. So back at DCNug, I'm going to click on Close and let that installation finish there for the role. And let's click on File Explorer from the taskbar. We'll maximize that. We'll click on this PC on the left, double click on the C drive, and let's right click and create a new folder. So we'll click on New Folder, and let's call this Content. How about that for clever? So this will be our content server. This share will be called Content. So we'll right click on Content, click on Properties, we'll click on the Sharing tab, we'll click on Share. Let's go ahead and type in Everyone regarding the share. We'll click on Add, and let's go ahead and change that to Read Write for Everyone from a share perspective, and click on Share. And we'll click on Done. And let's also click on Advanced Sharing here. And then there's a button here for caching. So we'll click on Caching. And then we're going to put a check in the checkbox to enable branch cache for this share. And then we'll click on OK. And OK again. And then we'll click on Security. It looks like from an NTFS permissions, everybody is good to go. All right, so let's click on Close. And let's also put some content in that content folder. So let's open up, let's go to the C drive just for a moment and go to Windows. And let's go, I'm going to grab the media folder and right click, copy. Let's go back to the C drive and go back to our content folder and right click and paste. That way we have something for users at the branch office to go ahead and pull down from this content server. Fantastic. Let's jump back over to Server 2, who's going to be our caching host, and verify the install is done there. So back on Server 2, we'll bring up Server Manager again, and it appears that the installation succeeded for the branch cache feature. Fantastic. So let's open up the integrated scripting environment here on Server 2. There's an icon for it in the taskbar. And let's do a get-bc for branch cache status. And with the cursor at the end of that line, we'll hit F8 to execute that. So let me arrange this a little bit. So if we scroll up in the output, and here's the line we're looking for, hosted cache server configuration is false. So this server doesn't have the actual feature enabled. And one way of enabling that would be to go ahead and use the enable command from PowerShell. So the command we'll use is enable-bc hosted server space dash register SCP. The SCP is an acronym for Service Connection Point. Effectively, it's going to let Active Directory know that this is a server that's capable of doing host caching for the branch. So we'll go ahead and hit F8 with our cursor at the end of row 2. So now if we run the get-bc status and hit F8 to run that, and then scroll up through this output, now regarding the hosted cache server configuration, regarding enabled, it is true. So we're partway there. Now we could go to our client and we could use PowerShell commands to actually specifically tell our client who the hosted cache servers are, or we could push a policy including discovery of the caching servers through group policy. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's go up to DC-Nug into group policy editor. So back up here on DC-Nug, let's go ahead and make sure we're on the right machine. Okay, so here on DC-Nug, let's go back into Server Manager, and from the Tools dropdown, let's select Group Policy Management. We'll maximize that full screen. And let me arrange this a little bit by sliding that over a little bit so we can see better. And we'll go ahead and open up the forest and the domain and nuggetlab.com, and let's modify the default domain policy. I'll click OK for the warning saying this is going to apply anywhere this is linked. And let's right click on the default domain policy and click on Edit. And we'll maximize the edit screen as well. And we'll arrange the layout here a little bit as well so we can see better. So here, under Computer Configuration, underneath Policies, we'll expand Policies. We'll expand Administrative Templates, and then we'll expand Network. So it's under Computer Configuration, Policies, Administrative Templates, Network. And let's do a couple things here. Number one, for the Landman server, we want to go ahead and do hash publication for branch cache. And that way the servers and clients can identify, based on the hash, whether the content they're after is already cached or if they need to go all the way back to the original content server to get it. So we'll double click on hash publication for branch cache, and we'll click on the radio button for enabled. And from the drop down, I'm going to go ahead and say do the hash publication for all shared folders. If you wanted to, you could limit that just to the folders that are participating as part of branch cache. However, in this demonstration, I'm going to leave it as all shared folders and click on OK. Next, under Network here on the left, we have a section for branch cache. So we'll select that, and then we have an option for turn on branch cache. So let's go ahead and double click on that. Let me bring that up a little bit so we can see the OK button at the bottom. And we're going to click on the radio button for enabling branch cache, and then click on OK. And then we have two options here. We have one for distributed mode, where the caching is shared across the PCs on that subnet at the remote network at the branch, or we can go ahead and specify we want hosted cache mode. So if we double click on set branch cache hosted cache mode, if we click on enabled radio button, then it gives us an opportunity to put the name of the hosted cache server. So in our case, that's going to be srv2-nug.nuggetlab.com. And we'll click on OK. Another option we have is we can allow the auto discovery. So if we want to enable auto discovery of the hosted cache servers, we could double click on that, click on enable, and that will allow the clients to auto discover hosted cache servers at a branch office. So for the demo, I'm going to enable that as well and click on OK. And then one more option right here for the demo, the configure branch cache for network files. If we double click on that and click on enable, by default, it's going to do the caching for any connectivity that is worse than 80 milliseconds. So in a lab environment, if you want to force it to do the branch caching, even if you have better connectivity than that, we can go ahead and decrease that. For example, we could put that at 0, which would mean we always want to do branch cache. So with the network files enabled and set to 0 for the latency, we'll go ahead and click on OK. And then we can go ahead and close the Group Policy Management Editor. And then we'd want to make sure that all the parties involved, the content server, the hosted cache server, and the clients all have a current copy of the group policy. So we can either wait for it or do a GP update /force, which is what I want to do right here. So since we're right here on DC-nug, let's go ahead and just launch PowerShell. There's an icon here on the taskbar for it. And we'll do a GP update /force and press enter. And then let's go over to server 2 and we'll do the same thing there. So here on server 2, we'll go ahead and do a GP update /force and do an F8 to run that. And let's also go ahead and do that on our client. So here on our Windows 10 client, let's go ahead and right click on the integrated scripting environment icon in the taskbar. And instead of just running it, let's right click on the Windows PowerShell ISE and then run as administrator, because we'll need elevated privileges. And then we'll click yes to the user account control. And then from here, we'll do GP update /force and hit F8 to launch that. Fantastic. And let's also do a get-bc status. So with the cursor at the end of row 2, we'll hit F8 to run that. And we'll scroll up to take a look. So this is where we begin our troubleshooting. So the branch cache status for this client, it's enabled, but it's currently stopped. And I'm just wondering if it'll take just a few seconds for that to kick in. So I'm going to use the squeegee up here, wait just a moment, and I'm going to use the status command one more time. Get-bc status. We'll scroll up, and there we go, much better. So it took a few moments for that to kick in. So now it's enabled, it's running, and the mode is hosted cache as opposed to distributed. And there's our server that we can go ahead and use. And from a troubleshooting perspective, we'd want to make sure we had the correct role on the content server, the feature enabled on the host server who's doing the caching, and then we could do a get-bc status on each one of them, and then look at the respective parts for each of them. So for example, on the hosted cache server, we'd want to make sure that that feature is enabled. And on the client, we'd want to make sure that it's running and enabled, and it knows who to use as a caching server. So let's go ahead and minimize PowerShell, and let's bring up Performance Monitor and see if we can see some counters regarding branch cache. So we'll click on the Windows icon in the bottom left-hand corner and simply type in perfmon, P-E-R-F-M-O-N, and press enter. That'll bring up Performance Monitor. we'll go ahead and click on Performance Monitor under Monitoring Tools, and then we'll click on the green plus symbol to add some additional counters. So we have lots of options here. They're alphabetical, so we're going to go up in this list and go up to branch cache. I'm going to just bring in everything. So I'm just going to highlight or click on branch cache, click on add, and that's going to bring in all the counters regarding branch cache here on this Windows 10 client. And then we'll click on OK. So another option that we can use to see this data is we can use this drop down regarding the graph type and select report, and that'll just give us the numbers. I also left the processor time there, which is great just to give us an indication this is a live feed that is still functioning. And if none of these numbers regarding branch cache move at all, that'd be an indication there's some problem in our configuration. Or at least after we attempt to get files from a content server that should be going through branch cache. Then if these numbers don't move, then we want to look at each of the pieces, the content server, the caching server, and the client to make sure that they're all cooperating for the function of branch cache. So let me go ahead and squeeze this window a little bit over here to the left. And let's click on File Explorer. It's giving us the quick access by default. I'm going to click on the star and do a //dc-nug. Press enter, and then we'll double click on content. So that's the content from our content server. So for the initial pull of this data, if we copy it over to this local PC, the caching host at the local branch, in our case server 2, should be caching that so that for subsequent reads from other devices on that same subnet at the branch office, they could actually read it from the cache on the caching server as opposed to pulling it all the way across the wide area network. So let's do this. Let's go ahead and right click on media from DC-nug, click on copy, and then we'll go ahead and click on the desktop over here, right click, and paste. And hope for the best. Hey, well good, the counters are moving, that's always promising. And so for the initial read of that content, it's going to be pulling all of that from the server because it's the first read. Beautiful, and that's done. In this nugget, we've taken a look at how to enable the branch cache feature in Windows Server 2016. As far as troubleshooting it, we'd want to make sure, first of all, that the correct roller feature is installed on the appropriate server. Secondly, we'd want to make sure we enable -bc hosted server and do a -register SCP on the caching server so it can register itself as available as a hosted cache server for that branch office. And third, we could run a get-bc status on the content server, on the client, and the caching server just to verify that the roles that they're supposed to play are enabled on each of those respective devices, whether it's a content server, a caching server, or a client. And now I invite you, if you haven't already, to spend a little bit of time in the hands-on lab that we've provided so you can practice hands-on enabling the branch cache feature in Windows Server 2016. So have fun with the lab, and I'll see you in the next nugget. Meanwhile, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.